Hello, BookTube. Well, it's finally here, the long-awaited party, when the guys over at Stripcover Lit commence their read-along of The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. Uh, they are doing the first 6 chapters of Book 1 of The Lord of the Rings, which is the first 6 chapters of The Fellowship of the Ring. And I couldn't resist jumping in. uh, and I thought we'd start with background for those of you who might not be familiar with the story. Uh, the Fellowship of the Ring brings back several characters from Tolkien's uh, children's book, The Hobbit. Only almost immediately in the book, you can tell that there's a different register going on here. This is not a children's book. Uh, we meet Bilbo Baggins, who is a hobbit, which is a humanoid species at maturity about half the size of a human, about the size of a human child, uh, who live far to the west of the the fantasy world of Middle Earth, which Tolkien has invented, and which is roughly early Middle Ages in terms of technology. No mechanized technology, largely agrarian, feudal. Uh, Bilbo in The Hobbit takes part in many adventures, and the book climaxes with the Battle of the Five Armies, in which a huge amount of drama takes place. So much so that the reader of The Hobbit, especially children, might overlook the fact that in the course of that book, Bilbo discovers a magic ring, which is plain and gold, has no markings or jewels on it, and when you put it on, you become invisible. In the milieu of The Hobbit, it looks like just one thing among many. You've got giant spiders, you've got giant eagles, you've got dragons, you've got riddles, you've got Gollum, you've got elves and goblins and trolls. What's a magic ring? More or less, one way or another in The Hobbit. But the Fellowship opens 50 years later, longer than 50 years later. Hobbits are a long-lived species, and Bilbo is hale and hearty at the age of 111, and is having a party to celebrate his 11th birthday. But Gandalf, who's another non-human creature, he's a wizard, looks like a human, but he appears not to age and has various mystical abilities. He was a major character in The Hobbit, and he too returns in the Fellowship of the Ring. He's an old friend of Bilbo's by this point, and as they converse early in the first chapters that we'll be reading, Bilbo confesses that although he is older, he doesn't exactly feel hale and hearty. He feels stretched, as Tolkien puts, or as Bilbo puts it, like butter over too much bread, and wants a rest. And it becomes clear from the context of the first few conversations that we see from them that they've talked about this before, and that Bilbo's plan is to leave the Shire, the land where he lives, and to go to the mountains, to go far away from prying relatives and friends and whatnot, and just seek rest. It becomes clear in the course of these chapters that the goal is Rivendell, which is the elf city that plays a part in The Hobbit. And elves are yet another humanoid species, not human. They are immortal. They are often characterized as largely energy beings encased in flesh. They're incredibly sharp senses. They're incredibly light, they're eldritch beings. They're more connected to the supernatural world than any other race that Tolkien presents us with. Bilbo has a plan to leave, and he has his ring still, and it becomes obvious. Gandalf actually points it out that the ring is exercising a degree of mental control over Bilbo. It also is clear that the ring is prolonging his life, and that they have agreed that Bilbo will leave the ring behind. In fact, that he will bequeath it, along with his house and all of his possessions, to his young cousin Frodo. Bilbo is reluctant to do that when it comes to it. Doesn't want to give up the ring, but he does, and goes on his way. And then we meet Frodo and Gandalf, of course, are old friends too, and they talk. But Gandalf leaves. He leaves the Shire and is gone for a long time. He's gone for years, until Frodo thinks, as Tolkien puts it, that he may have lost interest in the affairs of hobbits. He eventually returns, careworn, and in the second chapter that we're reading, The Shadow of the Past, he gives a great deal of information to Frodo that we don't know, that we've only had very faintly sketched. And it turns out that the ring is much more important than a magical trinket. It's much more important than a little MacGuffin from The Hobbit. It's in fact the most important object in the world. It's as Gandalf reveals, he in a classic moment, he takes the ring, Frodo hands it to him reluctantly, and he throws it into the fireplace. And Frodo is alarmed. He thinks this thing that has started to exercise a hold over him is going to be destroyed. But of course, it not only isn't destroyed, it isn't even heated. But the fire has been just enough to bring out lettering inside the ring, which was invisible otherwise. And the lettering is in Elvish, and Gandalf can read it, and it's the final piece of the puzzle. Although he knew before, the researches that he's done off stage have convinced him that this is in fact the one ring, an artifact created by the Dark Lord Sauron, who lives and rules in Mordor, far to the east of Middle-earth, into which he poured a great part of his power to control and subvert the wills of others. And the line on the ring that's revealed is part of a verse, the famous verse that haunts the whole Lord of the Rings, about the various rings that have been made. It's the 3 rings for the Elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. And as Gandalf makes clear to Bilbo, or to Frodo, what that means is that in ancient times, the elf smithies made 3 magical rings and a group of other rings too, lesser rings. And unbeknownst to them, Sauron, the Dark Lord of Mordor, made a ring to control the others. And so the 3 elven rings, which were never touched by that evil, had to hide from it, and the others were all subverted. The dwarf rings were taken or destroyed. The 9 rings given to men subverted the men who wore them until they became ring wraiths. They became shadowy riders of evil, servants of Mordor. In other words, in the chapter The Shadow of the Past, Gandalf, Tolkien, unfolds a much bigger and more complex picture of Middle-earth than we have ever seen before. This is not, elves versus goblins. This is not petty stuff. This is not trolls turning into stone. This is literally end of the world stuff. And Bilbo decides that since the enemies of Sauron are hunting him and are closing in on the Shire, it's not safe for him to stay there. It's not safe for him, and it's not safe for his friends. So he decides to leave. And Gandalf agrees with this plan, but leaves himself before. He tells Frodo, "You will no doubt need my company on the road," but something pressing comes up, and he leaves and says he will soon be back, but he isn't. He gets delayed. He doesn't show up. And Frodo decides that Gandalf, and no Gandalf, he should leave anyway. So he and his servant Sam do leave. They take the ring and they leave the Shire and go on the road. They are soon joined by 2 other hobbits, Merry and Pippin, and they realize that they are being pursued by the Black Riders, who can sort of smell the magic of the ring. They go outside of their little home, and gradually, expertly, the stage broadens. They enter the world. They enter the larger world, and find it not only beset with dangers, but also containing wonders and people that they hadn't guessed. And one of the pivotal groups that they meet first is a group of wandering high elves, led by an elf named Gildor, who asks them what they're doing, and actually asks them, didn't Gandalf tell you anything before you left about the dangers you'd be facing? It's obvious that Gandalf meant to reveal a lot more, and that his being delayed for mysterious reasons has thrown a serious monkey wrench in things. The elves don't have any interest in helping. They wander away, and the hobbits are eventually find themselves in the old forest, a very old and murky part of the woods, where one of the trees tries to eat one of the hobbits. And at the last minute, they are saved by another mysterious character, another non-human character, a humanoid called Tom Bombadil, who's taller than a hobbit, taller even than a dwarf, has a bright red face, very merry affect, but seems to have total command over the things around him. Barrow wights, evil old trees, the weather, everything seems to do what he tells it, even though he's not stern. He tells it to them in happy pranking song nonsense verse, but it happens anyway. And that's the end of where we go. That is the last of these chapters that we're going to read this time around. And Adrian and Dalton did that and discussed it. Their discussion this first time around largely took the form of Adrian saying that nothing happens in the first 6 chapters. I think that summary that I just gave you shows that that's a rather odd thing to say. And also Dalton kind of agreeing with him that nothing happens. I'm not really sure. Not really sure of it. Being chased by black riders, being told that you have the one ring in your possession and didn't know it all these years, being eaten by a tree and saved by a magic creature. I'm not sure that counts as nothing, but their segment, first of all, mainly consisted of Adrian saying that the greatest fantasy novel of all time stinks, and that every single one of us who ever liked it was mistaken. I don't agree with that, of course, and I think he might change his mind the more he reads. The book undoubtedly gets more dramatically compelling as it goes along. But rereading these first 6 chapters really reminded me that Tolkien was ready to gallop right away in this book. You couldn't open the story of this size, scope, and depth in a better way. You absolutely have to do it in a small focus, with ordinary people leaving their home and eventually discovering a bigger and more dangerous world. That's the only way you can do this, and of course that just keeps happening. But I also had a couple of other observations. I'll let you go. We'll keep doing this. I will do a companion video for every. I would never miss a Tolkien read along. This is too much fun. I noticed a couple of things this time around that I wanted to stress just from my reading. First one being that something that has been debated for 70 years, and that Tolkien's friends debated with him, which is the inclusion of the prologue. The book has a prologue of mind-numbing tedium, basically a sociological exegesis of what hobbits are and what they like to eat and their various family groups and genealogies, and it refers to books that aren't written, and it refers to their agriculture. And it's stultifying. As a way to open a book, it's equaled, if not surpasses, the opening of Moby Dick, which could not be any less dramatic. You've got Call Me Ishmael, but before that, you've got 10 pages of encyclopedia entries about whales. And any reader who doesn't know what to expect is going to come to that and say, what on earth? And the same thing with the Fellowship of the Ring. You're going to come to it. If you come to it cold, not knowing anything at all, you're going to get that prologue, and it's going to stop you flat in your tracks. And the thing is, there's nothing in it that you need. Everything starts with the first chapter, The Long-Awaited Party. Everything starts there, and everything of importance in the prologue that you actually might need to know is covered in the chapters themselves by the characters in conversation. So I don't understand why Tolkien kept it. I really don't. And this is one of those cases I often tell first readers of Moby Dick, skip straight to the beginning of the book, the beginning of the actual narrative. I often tell first readers of War and Peace, skip the last 50 pages. Tolstoy finishes his story and then gives you a 50-page disquisition on the nature of history. Skip it. Don't bother to read it. And I often tell first-time readers of The Lord of the Rings, don't read the prologue. Skip it. Just start with the long-awaited party. You're not missing anything. And another thing I noticed this time around when I was reading it, I had a heretical thought. Is Gandalf bad at his job? At the end of the Hobbit, he thinks nothing of the ring. At the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, at Bilbo's party, he thinks very little of the ring. He's surprised that Bilbo is acting the way he does. It concerns him a lot more than he lets on. Why is this ring apparently having this effect on my old friend? And it starts to click in his mind that only the great rings and only great evil can have that effect, and only great rings can lengthen life. He starts to have his suspicions then, and then years pass where he is steadfastly researching this ring. By the time the Shadows of the Past, by the time the second chapter happens, by the time he returns to the Shire, he tells Frodo, I did not need to throw the ring in the fire. I am completely sure that it is the One Ring. In other words, the most dangerous thing in Middle-earth, and the thing that Sauron, the Dark Lord of Mordor, wants more than anything. And he sent spies, emissaries, and the Ringwraiths themselves to the Shire to get it. Gandalf tells Frodo, just wait, I'll be right back. I'm going to run a brief errand, and then I'll join you on the road, and we'll go to Rivendell. Why does Gandalf do that? Why? If he knows it's the One Ring, and he knows spies are all around the Shire, what possible reason could he have? And later on in the book, we learn what his errand was. It's not anything nearly as important as this. He should have stuck with the ring and with Frodo right away. There shouldn't have been any hesitation. But not only that, when Frodo meets Gildor, the High Elf, and his company on the road, Gildor is actually surprised that Gandalf has told Frodo so little of the danger that faces him. And not only that, but Gildor and his elves leave. They leave food and water for the hobbits, but they themselves leave, meaning that even though Gandalf couldn't maybe tell them about the One Ring, because the fewer people you tell, the better, he also didn't ask them to help the hobbits, even not knowing about the ring. He doesn't set up any kind of network to help them. Later on in the book, we learn that the Shire has been constantly guarded by the Dunedain, by the Rangers. This group of people that we'll meet later on. But none of them step forward to help the hobbits. None of them are guarding the hobbits on the way. None of them is saying, don't take a detour into the old forest. The trees might eat you. Nothing like that. No one's there to help them with the Black Riders. They have to hide. It's a random chance that the ring isn't lost right then. And this is as we're later told repeatedly, this is Gandalf's whole mission. This is the whole reason he's in Middle-earth at all. It's finally happened. After hundreds of years of being alive, he's finally approached his mission, and it seems like it catches him totally unaware. I hadn't thought those heretical thoughts before I read this time around. So I have the guys at Strip Cover Lit to thank for that, and then I'm wondering what I'll think as I go on. Another thing, one last thing before I let you go, because this is another hugely long video. I could talk for 2 hours about Fellowship of the Ring. I could talk for 2 hours about these 6 chapters. There's so much in it. Another thing I noticed that I wanted to point out to the rest of you, that this is the only major fantasy novel I know of that not only opens but continues for hundreds of pages. And where we're stopping in chapter 6, it's still 200 more pages before it happens. It opens and continues at a leisurely pace for hundreds of pages in which there is no main character who's human. We meet farmers and whatnot, who various members of the big people, but all the major speaking characters are not human. Which is kind of weird in a way. We have hobbits, we have a wizard, and we have whatever the hell Tom Bombadil is, but that's it. We have to go 2 or 3 more chapters to get to the chapter called Strider, in which we meet a man, in which we meet one of our major characters who is a human being. I think that's fascinating, and I think it shows how far Tolkien was inside his own world. He obviously didn't think that his readers needed any kind of anchor in their own species. He obviously didn't think of that at all. He was so lost in this story that he was telling. And I think the fact that he was that lost in this story might account for the stubbornly horrible decision to include the prologue. he was probably not even questioning the fact that his readers would be fascinated in what kind of potatoes the hobbits grow. It probably never even occurred to him at this point, so lost in the lore he was, that his primary goal is to tell a story that new readers can understand. I love that. In a way, I do. It makes for a lamentable beginning to a great book, but I love the fact that he is so invested in what Dalton Gentry points out in the guy's video, the world building of Lord of the Rings, which is so stellar, so amazing, and so unequaled, really, in the 70 years since. But anyway, so that's the Fellowship of the Read-Along. That's part 1. That was the first 6 chapters. Next, the guys are going to do the next 6 chapters of book 1. Tolkien meant The Lord of the Rings to be one book, which is the reason we're not talking about chapters in the conventional sense. The next 6 chapters are book 1, and then the Fellowship of the Ring has book 2, but book 2 stops in the middle of things because it's not meant to be the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. It's not meant to conclude a volume. It's meant to just continue the story. So the next 6 chapters of book 1 will be their next installment and mine. And in the comments field, let me know what you think. First time, 20 times, let's all read this together, and leave comments for them as well. This is a lot of fun to reread Lord of the Rings as the seasons change, because that's also Frodo's reality. This is exactly the time of the year that he leaves the Shire. So what better time to read it? But anyway, sorry for the length of the video, book 2. I'll see you soon.